Discover the hidden power of sweet potatoes. 12 amazing health transformations for seniors. Expos. Helen Thompson's mind raced as she stood in her tiny kitchen. The smell of cinnamon drifted through the air, a comforting balm on her heavy heart. The sweet potatoes simmered, waiting to be transformed into treasures of nourishment, yet doubts clawed at her thoughts. Could a simple recipe really make a difference? For years, she'd been nothing but a schoolteacher, her mind steeped in lesson plans and grading papers, a far cry from the health-conscious advocate she dreamed of becoming. With every stirring of the pot, her heart threatened to sink further. What if her efforts to honor her grandmother's legacy were met with ridicule? What if they offered nothing beyond fleeting moments of joy? As she arranged the plates for her parents, Helen's fingers trembled. Would they laugh at her attempts? Or worse, would they look upon her dishes as hollow imitations of meals long gone? She hesitated at the door threshold, the weight of legacy forcing her to confront an inner demon. The idea of sharing her kitchen experiments with the local community ignited a flicker of excitement, but was cleverly camouflaged by the oppressive shadows of anxiety. Could she really channel her grandmother's warmth and wisdom? Uncertain thoughts crowded her mind. Who was she to teach about health or healing? A simple schoolteacher barely able to convince herself that sweet potatoes could hold magic. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As Helen recounted her grandmother's stories, legacy and purpose collided within her. Each meal she shared rekindled laughter, but it also sparked unnoticed fires of envy among local food experts. A well-known dietitian, seeking to maintain his prestige, had begun to undermine her. His whispers surrounded her like an unshakable fog. She's not qualified. What does she know? Gnawing at her confidence. The fear of being discredited hung heavy, sweat beading on her brow. She thought of her parents, who once flourished in this very home. She thought of their joy now dimmed, replaced with uncertainty, her father barely lifting his head from the newspaper, her mother drifting through the day with a glassy stare. Helen clenched her fists, angry at her own helplessness. Could she allow someone to diminish everything she was working for? Yet, a darker question lingered. Could her passion stand up to the relentless scrutiny of the professional world? Faced with this opposition, Helen felt the walls closing in. Could she remain true to herself? Each evening her resolve thinned, insecurity creeping in. They depended on her strength, but she feared she might fall apart under the weight of expectation. She stood before her reflection, waves of doubt crashing against a fragile shore. What was she truly fighting for? As she prepared her next meal, waiting for that flicker of hope to reignite within, a sudden knock echoed through the hallway. The note slid through the door, heavy with secrets, words clawing desperately for attention. Her heart raced. What could this contain? Would it offer solace or threaten to unravel everything she believed about herself? The pulse quickened, her truth teetering on the precipice of revelation. She drew in a breath, knowing that life as she knew it might never be the same again. Helen's mind raced as the note lay on the floor, taunting her with its unknown contents. The anticipation felt like a tightening noose around her chest. She knelt to pick it up, her fingers brushing against the paper that seemed to hum with unspoken urgency. Just open it, she whispered to herself, battling the urge to let fear dictate her actions. Unfolding the note revealed a neatly pinned invitation to participate in a community health workshop, an opportunity to share her sweet potato recipes and the philosophy behind them. Her heart thumped in her chest, splitting her between excitement and dread. This was a chance to finally step into the role she had always wanted, yet the potential for failure loomed larger than ever before. She'd seen countless videos of others dominating platforms like this, effortlessly captivating their audiences with polished presentations and accolades. Yet here she was, an anxious schoolteacher with self-doubt biting at her heels. Helen placed the note down and paced the room, her mind whirring like the blender she often used. Impulsively, she grabbed a sweet potato and set it on the counter. Its vibrant orange skin seemed to glow, a symbol of vitality and possibility. If she could pour her grandmother's wisdom into each dish, maybe she could transform her perception of herself and regain her family's joy. But she wrestled with the doubt. Could she convey that wisdom to an audience? Leaders in health, and particularly that dietitian, with his dismissive smirks, had the power to strip her legacy down to nothing. What do I even know? The thought struck harder than she anticipated. Was her knowledge enough? Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Cooking is more than recipes. It's a declaration of love. Perhaps it was time to reclaim that sense of purpose. But could she muster the courage and skill to stand before a crowd, let alone challenge the seasoned professionals who might critique her? That evening, with a pot simmering on the stove, she began drafting her speech. Each line felt like a battle, arguing both sides of her fear. Would the audience feel her passion or see only her hesitation? The words flowed like the ingredients she carefully measured, an odd juxtaposition of chaos and clarity. She sifted through her memories, envisioning her grandmother encouraging her with whispers of confidence, each memory solidifying her resolve, yet also amplifying the stakes. As Helen spoke aloud to no one in particular, she rehearsed the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Helen Thompson, and I want to explore the hidden power of sweet potatoes. Doubt continued to claw at her, whispering that no one would care to listen. But beneath the fear, she felt a flicker of determination. This was her moment, not just to teach others, but to find herself. Night after night, she practiced, laying bare her heart in front of the mirror. The more she recited the words, the stronger she felt, as if she were breathing life into a dormant part of herself. Though her hands shook with nerves when she finally signed up for the workshop, she felt empowered, a small victory that ignited hope. Weeks blurred into a haste of preparation mixed with dread. As the workshop date approached, Helen felt the audience's eyes boring into her, already heavy with expectation. Each day she battled the dietitian's taunts echoing in her mind, but she threatened to confront them all the way she wrestled with her fear all these years. Finally, the day arrived, and Helen stood before the crowd, heart racing, palms sweaty, ready to face not just the people in the room, but the oppressive doubts that had lingered like shadows. Today is about nourishment, tradition, and healing. Her voice rang out, firm yet trembling. Today is about sweet potatoes and what they can do for our lives. As she began to share her recipes infused with memories, a gentle confidence built within her, fueled by her grandmother's spirit. Would it be enough to silence the critics? Would she find acceptance in the heart of her community? And as she unveiled the last dish, just as she felt a wave of triumph cresting, she noticed the familiar figure in the back, arms crossed, eyes piercing her adversary, the dietitian, casting a doubtful glance. The moment hung tense, a decisive hush spilling over the room, leaving her poised on the edge of revelation. Realization washed over Helen. She was no longer just confronting the audience. She was also standing before her own insecurities. With newfound clarity, she prepared to tackle the challenge head-on. The taste of victory was tantalizing, but uncertainty lingered like an old friend. Just as she summoned her final words, an unexpected voice broke through the air, challenging her authority and leaving Helen veering into unknown territory. How she would respond could change everything. The silence enveloped the room, thick with tension as Helen blinked at the figure in the back. The dietitian's voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through her moment like a knife. With all due respect, Helen, I think you're overselling sweet potatoes' benefits. Nutrition isn't about nostalgia. The words triggered a surge of emotions within her: embarrassment, defensiveness, and a new kind of resolve. What had she been afraid of? Validation? Acceptance? No. This was now about authenticity. I believe nutrition is both science and tradition, she countered, trying to steady her voice amid the rising pulse of adrenaline. What is nutrition if not a bridge to our past and future? A few nods rippled through the audience, offering Helen fleeting hope. But self-doubt lingered like a fog, threatening to swallow her conviction. She had stumbled onto a fork in the road, a challenge to her authority. It was one thing to speak about her love of cooking. It was another to defend her perspective against an expert. But Helen wondered if this moment was precisely what she needed to solidify her resolve. In this encounter, she grasped a different kind of victory. She remembered her grandmother's unwavering belief in the importance of heritage, even when newer ideas clashed. What if this wasn't merely about sweet potatoes? What if, enveloped in her recipes, she wasn't just offering food, but a challenge to narrow perspectives in nutrition? Taking a deep breath, she softly continued, "Sweet potatoes are a vessel of my grandmother's love, a testament to resilience. They carry memories and health, and they could teach us something profound about the intersection of tradition and modern science." It felt like uncovering a hidden layer of herself, an empowerment that surged through her. The room remained still despite the weight of her opponent's presence, eyes shifting back and forth as if they were participants in a duel of ideas. Helen felt a connection to them, as though she were speaking not only for herself, but for every individual who had ever hesitated to assert their truth in a sea of expert opinions. What if, she pressed, we use these foods not just to supply nutrients, but to forge connections with those we love? What if the act of preparing a dish becomes a gesture of care? With each word, her confidence escalated, propelling her into a rhythm filled with conviction. She heard her grandmother's voice echoing behind her, infusing her spirit with wisdom. This was her platform, her chance to reclaim her narrative. Cooking wasn't merely about technique. It resonated with stories and histories that needed telling. Suddenly, the challenging voice at the back, once a source of intimidation, now felt like an opportunity. "What are you suggesting? That a sweet potato can replace clinical evidence?" The dietitian challenged again, though this time, there was a flicker of intrigue mingled with skepticism. "Yes," Helen replied, the words slipping more easily than she anticipated. "Nutrition can thrive on research, but it doesn't have to dismiss emotion. The power of food lies in its storytelling. It's about how we connect, heal, and empower each other." Threads of applause began to ripple through the crowd, a reflection of embracing her truth. In that moment, Helen realized her words had ignited something in those present. They weren't just listening, they were connecting. This was the dialogue she had yearned to create, not merely proving her expertise, but fostering a deeper understanding of health as a human experience. Feeling buoyed by her thoughts, Helen turned her gaze toward the dietitian, eyes steady and fierce. Maybe nutrition needs a holistic approach, a blend of science and heritage, creating space for all kinds of knowledge. The tension shifted, and Helen knew she was finally standing tall, balancing on the precipice of self-acceptance. But as she navigated her newfound strength, she caught the dietitian's flinty eyes narrowing, and behind that, a flicker that hinted at an impending response. The moment was charged with potential. What rebuttals would arise? Would her raw vulnerability provoke deeper discussions or tighten the leash of her adversary's scorn? Helen stood grounded, but the air crackled with uncertainty, her growth and self-discovery unraveling as one important debate loomed ahead. With each passing second, the stakes escalated. How she would answer this crossroads could spell the difference between merely talking about sweet potatoes and transforming how she understood her own worth in the world of nutrition. The workshop was no longer just an opportunity. It had become a defining moment of confrontation. And as silence rested once more, Helen's heart thudded in anticipation. What revelations would surface next? Before Helen could brace herself for the response, the dietitian's voice sliced through the air again, this time with an edge of undeniable challenge. "You're romanticizing food, Helen. We can't guide people's health decisions based on stories alone. Data and science must be the foundation." Helen felt a wave of frustration rise within her, her conviction warring with the urge to retreat behind scientific data. Yet, the memory of her grandmother's kitchen battle within her. Cooking had always been more than just nourishing bodies. It was a celebration of heritage, a connection to family. Would she allow someone to strip that foundation from her? Scientific data is crucial, Helen conceded, her heart racing. But if we ignore the emotional and cultural aspects of food, we miss a critical piece of the puzzle. People don't just eat to live. They eat to feel connected, to remember, and to comfort. The audience seemed captivated, a collective energy pulsing through them as Helen caught various expressions: curiosity, skepticism, even excitement. She realized she stood on the cusp of something bigger than herself, an opportunity to pivot this discussion in a profoundly human direction. Using the analogy of sweet potatoes, Yes, there are studies demonstrating their health benefits. But what if we also consider the stories behind them? The family gatherings, the childhood memories? She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Those narratives drive behavior. They shape choices. Without them, we might as well be eating cardboard. She watched as the dietitian shifted, pressure mounting in the room. Was Helen winning them over? Or merely digging her own grave with romantic idealism? Churning thoughts fought for dominance as she reminded herself that this was not only a challenge to her ideas but a manifestation of her character. Instead of pitting science against tradition, why can't we see them as allies? Science can illuminate why foods like sweet potatoes matter, while the stories can make them relevant and appealing. Together, they can help people lead healthier lives. The tide began to turn, with surfaces creaking with applause emphatically building. But Helen could sense a tightening in her throat. She had painted her truth, but was it enough? Did her audience trust her? Did she trust herself? The dietitian's expression remained unreadable, but Helen could see the cogs turning behind that steely facade. So, are you advocating for emotional eating as a better pathway to health? She retorted, archly. No, Helen replied, her conviction solidifying once more. I'm advocating for a comprehensive view. We need to recognize that food isn't merely a physiological necessity. It's interwoven with our identities. It's celebrating our histories while adapting to modern scientific knowledge. It's a dialogue between the past and the present. The audience erupted with a wave of enthusiasm, momentarily drowned out by thought. Were they seeing the complexity? Were they recognizing her resolve, her identity? A sense of empowerment began to wash over her. The realization that her own past could coexist with forward-thinking ideals. But just as optimism surged, doubt wormed its way back into her mind. Would her argument withstand the rigor of scrutiny, or would it falter against the rigid walls of accepted nutrition science? The dietitian leaned forward, a new intensity in her eyes. What you're suggesting could shift mindsets, redefine nutrition education. But what if it alienates those who depend solely on data? Helen took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was at her moment to invoke a deep reflection on how she would navigate this contentious landscape. Perhaps we risk losing patience to rigidity in our systems. Isn't it worth the challenge to touch lives more profoundly? The tension reached a boiling point. She knew this was not just a conversation. It was about her growing self-awareness, her willingness to confront not only the opinions of others but the fortified structures in which she had entrenched herself. Caught in a whirlwind of internal and external reactions, Helen prepared herself to defend her stance further. With a newly ignited fire within, she thought about how sweet potatoes, once merely a culinary delight to her, had evolved into a metaphor for her profound transformation. As the silence enveloped the room once more, Helen resolved to continue this path, willing to turn the confrontation into a collaboration of ideas her resilience fortified. But would her continued navigation spark even deeper inquiries from the dietitian, leading to revelations that could either bolster or undo everything she had fought for? The answer loomed, tantalizingly close yet still shrouded in uncertainty. The air thickened with anticipation as Helen took a moment to assess the room. Anxiety stirred within her, pulsing like a heartbeat, but she felt a growing clarity. This moment was pivotal, a catalyst for the changes she sought both in her professional path and her personal convictions. Every eye in that audience was figuratively locked onto her, waiting for a resolution, a decisive answer to the complex interplay of science and emotion she had so passionately defended. While data is essential, she began, her voice steadying, it does not tell the whole story. If I were to distill my argument down to a single phrase, it would be this: health is not just a number, but a narrative. The crowd stirred, and Helen leaned into the energy, feeding off the palpable curiosity. We live in a culture that often prioritizes empirical evidence, percentages, statistics, and studies. Yet, countless individuals have historical ties to food that don't appear on a spreadsheet. The emotional weight of a recipe passed down generations, or the way a certain spice can evoke memories of childhood, these things shape our choices just as strongly as nutrition data can. Suddenly, a voice from the back interrupted her musings. But how do you ensure that these stories don't lead to unhealthy choices? It was a question that hung ominously in the air, but instead of allowing it to derail her, Helen seized it as an opportunity. That's where collaboration comes into play, she replied, scanning the room for faces that signaled engagement. We can guide those narratives through educated choices. It's not about discrediting data, it's about enriching it. Imagine a world where someone isn't just told that sweet potatoes are healthy, but is invited to explore how they mirror their own life experiences. What if instead of just a nutrient list, we offered users a recipe infused with cultural importance and personal storytelling? She could see waves of contemplation washing over her audience, and for the first time, she sensed a unifying current, a realization that personal narratives and scientific understanding could coexist rather than clash. Each story was a vessel, transporting knowledge and cultural wisdom, while science played the role of a lighthouse guiding the way through turbulent waters. But as Helen basked in this brief moment of reassurance, seeds of doubt began to germinate once more. Could she effectively convey this integrated approach, or was she merely indulging in ideological fantasies? This nagging worry could jeopardize her progress, but she was tired of standing on the sidelines of her own life. In her gut, she knew she had to assert her vision with even more resoluteness. We need to cultivate a space for dialogue where conversations about health include the richness of personal stories. By doing so, we can empower individuals to make lasting changes in their lives. This is not merely a theoretical stance. It is a practical framework for actual change. She paused for a moment, gauging the impact of her words. The room was abuzz, and for the first time, she felt a collective acknowledgement rather than division, a shifting in the perceived boundaries of their discussion. And yes, this approach requires vigilance, she continued. It will require us to confront discomfort, seek input from all stakeholders, and adjust our strategies. What if we created workshops where patients could share their narratives in conjunction with nutritionists sharing data-driven insights? This might not just create a bridge, it could result in a solid foundation. The dietitian's brows furrowed again, but this time it felt like a challenge she could embrace. Are you prepared to rally fellow dietitians around this concept? Her gaze was piercing, probing for weakness, yet challenge surged in Helen's veins, a desperate surge of excitement. I am, Helen replied firmly, but I can't do it alone. Change demands collaboration and intention from all sides, and I'm ready to drive this conversation forward. As the dialogue between them continued, Helen felt a shift within a reconciliation of her ideals and her professional aspirations. She was more than ready to stake her claim in this evolving narrative around food and health. A lingering question still weighed heavy on her mind, though. Would her peers be willing to meet her at the intersection of tradition and science? That thought loomed larger than ever. The moment was slipping into a suspenseful uncertainty. Was she paving the path toward a new paradigm, or merely standing at the edge of a precipice? Amidst the tension, Helen sensed the urgency. She had ignited a spark, but would it light a fire of change, or risk being extinguished by doubt? Every heartbeat counted now. How she moved forward would shape the course of her career, and she was ready for whatever came next. Would her next step be a leap into the unknown, or a cautious retreat into familiar but unchallenging grounds? The room settled into a tentative quiet, a silence punctuated by Helen's racing thoughts. As the responses faded, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was standing at a crossroads, not just for herself, but for her peers and the countless individuals their work impacted. The idea of invoking change through personal stories began to pulsate in her mind, growing vivid and daunting at the same time. It was both an opportunity and a challenge. Could she be the bridge that connected the emotional and the scientific aspects of health? Helen recognized that embracing this role would require more than just persuasive arguments. It demanded action. Her internal struggle shifted to a realization. She had the potential to lead, but it would require her to cultivate allies, to nurture relationships built on trust. After the discussion concluded, Helen felt her pulse echoing in her ears as she gathered her notes. She watched as attendees mingled, some clumped in deep conversation. The dietitian who had questioned her sat in a corner, arms crossed, a skeptical expression etched onto her face. Taking a breath, Helen approached the woman, feeling a mixture of apprehension and resolve. I appreciate your challenge, she said, her voice infused with sincerity. I know this might not align with everyone's traditional approach, but I believe you can help shape this narrative. The dietitian raised an eyebrow, an unspoken inquiry reflected in her glare. Helen pressed on. What if we conducted a pilot workshop? A small group focusing on how personal stories can complement nutritional knowledge. With your expertise, it could provide a robust model for others to follow. To Helen's surprise, the dietitian uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, intrigue sparking in her eyes. A workshop could work, but it hinges on how we frame it. If we could systematically link stories to health outcomes, there might be merit. Excitement surged in Helen as she quickly outlined potential frameworks for the workshop. They began to bounce ideas back and forth, each suggestion further igniting Helen's passion. Yet, an underlying anxiety gave her pause. Would others be as receptive? How could she convince them to break from conventional methods? Helen decided to delve deeper into potential allies. She sought conversations with health professionals in adjacent disciplines, psychologists, social workers, and even chefs, individuals who inherently understood the power of storytelling within their respective fields. The common thread amongst them was the transformative power of narrative. Crafting a cross-disciplinary alliance could amplify her message, integrating various insights and rich perspectives. Weeks turned into frantic days of planning and strategizing. Helen organized a meeting with key individuals, a gathering she labeled a vision summit. It felt audacious, yet invigorating. With every confirmation from her peers, she felt a thread weaving her vision into a possible reality. Yet that nagging discomfort still lingered, a question echoing in her mind. Were they ready to embrace this radical departure from the norm? The summit finally arrived, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Helen had never been more nervous. As she looked around the room at the diverse faces, she realized she was asking them to abandon familiar methods, an enormous leap into uncharted territory. Stumbling through the opening, Helen felt the heat of uncertainty rising again, a sense that she was on the edge of something monumental or foolishly idealistic. Health is a journey, she began, scanning the room, and every journey is colored by the stories we hold. Our narratives can guide our understanding of health, but they need to be curated with intention and insight. As she spoke, Helen noticed a flicker of engagement in their eyes, but skepticism remained. Moments of doubt crept around corners of her mind. The time for superficial debates was over, and the moment had arrived to address the hard truths head-on. What if they rejected her approach? The room was a crucible of anticipation, and Helen couldn't help but feel her ambition swell and wane with each second ticking by. Would they join her in this challenge to weave new narratives, or silence her ideas as fanciful distractions? Every moment she invested in this endeavor felt perilous, yet it was a risk she was willing to take. As the discussions unfolded around her, she felt the gravitational pull of purpose anchoring her intentions. And somewhere deep within, a steely resolve began to crystallize. Conformity might be safer, but it was the channel to growth that she sought. All eyes fell on her as she closed her remarks. Together, let us not just advocate for healthy choices, but for the stories that lead to them. The silence that followed was pregnant with tension, a fragile moment of anticipation waiting to burst. Would this fragment of hope resonate, or would it merely dissipate into disappointment? As she met the gazes around the room, her heart quickened. It was a leap, but would her daring be met with understanding or abandonment? She could sense the crossroads, leading to a potential transformation or the risk of being lost in ambivalence. The next steps were critical, and their response would mark the trajectory of not just her career, but a chance to redefine how narratives could influence health for many. Would the journey demand more than she was prepared to give? The anticipatory silence echoed in Helen's mind, a sound both deafening and disorienting. Her pulse quickened as she caught snippets of whispers amidst the stillness, signaling reflections, doubts, and perhaps even a hint of curiosity. Here she stood, the architect of her own ambition, yet she was acutely aware of the precarious balance between innovation and skepticism. The first response came from a familiar face, Jordan, the outspoken psychologist who had often rallied against untested methodologies. He leaned forward, voice steady yet laced with challenge. Helen, while I can appreciate the sentiment behind storytelling, isn't there a risk of diluting evidence-based practices? People need data to make informed choices. Helen felt a stir in her gut, a visceral reaction that bordered on defensiveness. She had expected resistance, but hearing it voiced so closely felt personal. Jordan, I'm not suggesting we abandon evidence. We can evolve it. Personal narratives don't replace data, they enhance it. They provide context, igniting a deeper connection and understanding. She watched as Jordan's expression shifted, his eyebrows momentarily softened. Yet, what had begun as an argument transformed into an inquiry. You really believe that stories can change behavior? Yes, she replied, the strength in her voice surprising even herself. Just as a single story can inspire a community, medical stories can illuminate experiences that statistics alone can't communicate. We're not just treating numbers, we're caring for people. The room shifted, and she sensed that she had ignited a flicker of uncertainty among the skeptics. As discussions flowed, she found herself in a rhythm, using stories of patients she had encountered to validate her points. Each narrative threaded through their conversations, building connections she hadn't anticipated. The dietitian, now more engaged, posed a new question about how they might measure the impact of such storytelling. Data is important, Helen agreed, but let us explore qualitative outcomes. How do patients feel when they can relate to another's experience? What behaviors do stories encourage? If we interlace qualitative and quantitative data, we may have something truly unique. The hour wore on, Helen's earlier fears fading as confidence ignited her words. Pockets of collaboration began to bloom, each participant sharing their own ideas, creating a kaleidoscope of perspectives. This was not just her vision anymore. It was evolving into a shared endeavor. The mere act of vocalizing their fears and hopes morphed into a collective exploration of uncharted territory. Her heart swelled, a sense of unity starting to replace her earlier isolation. By the time they wrapped up the summit, there was an air of excitement and realizable potential. Helen felt lighter, as though the weight on her shoulders had transformed into a burden shared by many. Yet, in the pit of her stomach, uncertainty still lurked. Would they truly implement this collaboration in their practices? As attendees began to disperse, she caught sight of the skeptical dietitian again, who approached her, eyes glimmering with a newfound spark. You've got a point, Helen. I'm willing to give this a try. Let us put together that workshop. The optimism flooding through Helen felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Her vision was gaining momentum, but as she stepped back to reflect on the summit's outcome, she was hit by a wave of anxiety. The transition from discussion to action would demand not just her leadership, but the commitment of those she had convinced. The days that followed were consumed with planning the workshop, targeting specific themes and appropriate participants. She enlisted those who had expressed interest, creating a structure that felt both ambitious and fragile. As she drafted her curriculum, Helen could feel her resolve strengthening, yet an invisible pressure hung overhead, the fear of failure. But then, as she fine-tuned her approach, another realization struck. She had fostered allies, but the most significant partnership was the one she needed to cultivate within herself. How would she manage this newfound momentum while balancing her own anxieties? Each evening brought a relentless cycle of self-doubt as she questioned her capabilities. What if she was pushing them too hard? What if the workshop proved to be a flop and her aspirations crumbled beneath her? What if, after all the effort, the stories didn't translate into tangible change? And then, without warning, inspiration struck. She could incorporate her own narrative, sharing her journey through challenges and triumphs in health advocacy. It would not only put her ideas into perspective, but serve as a testament to the potential impact stories could hold. As she sat there, poised to write her own story into their workshop, an intense wave of anticipation surged through her. With her own experiences as the anchor, Helen realized she was not merely advocating for transformation, she was embodying it. With renewed determination, she set to work. Yet just as she'd begun to transcend her hesitation, a lingering doubt knocked at her door. Could this truly open the floodgates for others? The complexity of her feelings swirled, leaving her unsure of the horizon she now navigated. But one thing was clear: she was stepping deeper into her own narrative, facing both the thrill and reality of what it meant to lead. As she prepared to share her journey in the workshop, the pivotal moment approached, and deep down, Helen understood. It was time to fully confront not only the implications of her work, but also the foundations of her own identity. What awaited her on the other side of this revelation? Would she emerge as an empowered changemaker or struggle against the currents of fear? The answer hovered just out of reach, teasing her with the promise of profound transformation. Helen sat at her desk, the soft hum of her computer a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. The workshop details danced in her mind, each element more compelling than the last. Yet, a stifling tension lurked beneath the surface as she began to outline her narrative. Would the raw honesty of her experiences resonate as intended? This wasn't merely another story. It was a pivotal moment that could shape her future. She had delved into the heart of her health advocacy journey, from early failures to small victories. But as she typed, something unsettling crept in, shadows of doubt clawing at her confidence. Would sharing her hardships expose her inappropriately, render her vulnerable before those who already questioned her methodologies? The idea was exhilarating and terrifying. Gripping the pen tighter, she stopped. What would happen if she unveiled herself, the doubts, the struggles? The thought momentarily paralyzed her, yet a flicker of resolve ignited. Through vulnerability, she could reveal strength. The very story she had longed to share could serve as a bridge not just for others, but for herself. If I can't do this, how can I expect others to follow suit? She murmured, feeling the weight of her responsibility as a leader. Days turned into a whirlwind of preparation. Each time she rehearsed her narrative, she felt raw emotion welling up. The narrative pulled her back to times when she felt isolated, battling imposter syndrome amidst seasoned professionals. The memories swirled moments when she had questioned her right to lead, to advocate for anything at all. Helen's commitment solidified further as she recognized the purpose behind revealing these vulnerabilities. Her story would serve as a case study in resilience, a living testament to the challenges faced in the pursuit of progress. Yet, the question remained, how much should she reveal? The tightrope between authenticity and professional integrity often felt perilous. With every passing hour, anticipation brewed. As she visualized the workshop, she saw participants sitting in rapt attention, fully engaged. But the vision sometimes blurred. What if they didn't connect? What if her vulnerability was met with misunderstanding or skepticism? Despite her fears, it was in these moments of doubt that she discovered a hidden aspect of herself. This narrative wasn't solely hers. It mirrored the experiences of others, resonating deep within their struggles. By laying bare her journey, Helen illuminated the path for others wrestling with their own uncertainties. As the workshop date drew near, a profound revelation emerged. She wasn't just shaping a professional endeavor. She was stepping into her own identity. The anguish of sharing her story morphed into a powerful assertion of self, a decision to embrace who she was unconditionally. The day before the workshop, she paced her living room, rehearsing her delivery. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating every corner of her space, mirroring the clarity of purpose she had found. Each sentence she crafted intertwined her story with tangible lessons, focusing on the universality of the human experience rather than her individual trials. But just as she began to feel ready, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jordan, the ever-present skeptic. Hope you're prepared for tomorrow. Remember, some people won't buy into the feeling side of things. The message stung, reigniting her doubts. What if she had misjudged the readiness of her peers for this transformative discussion? Thoughts swarmed her mind like bees in a tangled hive, and in the midst of that chaos, she recognized a critical choice. In that flickering moment between fear and resolve, she understood it wasn't about convincing Jordan or anyone else. It was about affirming her own commitment to change, even if it meant risking vulnerability. Helen took a deep breath, her heart racing, as she felt the conviction settle in. Tomorrow would be more than just an exercise in storytelling. It would be the beginning of a new chapter in her journey toward authenticity, a step into the uncharted territory of her own power. Just as hope surged through her, a chilling question emerged, echoing in her mind. Could she truly navigate the potential backlash, or would she find herself lost in the labyrinth of criticism? This question loomed ominously, a reminder that while she may be ready to fight for her vision, the true battle for acceptance had only just begun. The morning of the workshop arrived drenched in sunlight, hues of gold flooding Helen's workspace, as if urging her to embrace the day ahead. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer, practicing her opening lines. But the reflection didn't just show her attire. It revealed a woman caught at an intersection of ambition and vulnerability. With each rehearsed phrase, self-doubt threatened to resurface, whispering unkind affirmations about potential failure. As she moved toward the venue, the city felt alive, bustling with the purpose she yearned to embody. Yet, beneath this exhilaration lingered that ever-present anxiety. What if she stumbled? What if instead of illuminating paths forward, she cast shadows of embarrassment over her own work? Arriving early, she took a deep breath, letting the overwhelmingly sterile environment of the conference space ground her. Setting down her materials, she surveyed the rows of empty chairs that would soon be filled. The blank faces of her future audience stared back at her with silent judgment. Fixating on a particularly plain wall, she mentally dissected it. What would it feel like to transform an empty space into one vibrant with exchange, connection, and possibility? The prospect electrified her. As participants trickled in, her heart raced. She acknowledged faces that radiated skepticism, curiosity, and encouragement. Jordan entered last, his eyes scanning the environment with that smirk she had come to associate with judgment. It was just a workshop, she reminded herself. However, the stakes felt monumentally personal. The first few moments were challenging. Helen stood at the podium, her voice initially faltering as memories of doubt clawed at her. Yet, as she recalled her purpose, the lives that could be impacted by her message, something shifted within her. She dared to show her scars, sharing the moments of her darkest battles along with her triumphs. The complex tapestry of her journey woven seamlessly with relatable struggles. With each word, Helen felt the powerful release that only comes from true expression. She could almost sense the participants leaning in closer as stories unfolded, especially when she spoke about how she had learned to embrace her authenticity. Tension in the room gradually dissolved. Participants nodded, laughter erupted at her lighter anecdotes, and by the time she reached her climactic point, the potential of vulnerability as a strength, she felt an undeniable connection. Soon after, the feedback session began. The initial questions were, unsurprisingly, pointed. Did you find it necessary to reveal so much of your battle? Jordan asked, his tone deliciously condescending. Yet, instead of retreating behind her initial defensiveness, Helen confronted the inquiry head-on. Yes, I chose to share my experiences because they mirror the struggles many face. I didn't hide behind my profession today, I embraced my humanity. A powerful silence filled the room post-response, as others shared their thoughts, resonating with her truth. The tension shifted, barriers eroded. Others began to speak of their own vulnerabilities, a ripple effect sparked by Helen's courage. As the session came to an end, Helen walked off the stage shaken yet exhilarated. In embracing her uncertainty, she had forged an unexpected community where vulnerability was not a weakness but a shared strength, a place where her narrative had the potential to provoke change. When the workshop closed, an unexpected email notification flashed on her phone. It was from an influential figure in the health advocacy realm, expressing interest in collaborating based on her presentation. The future loomed brighter, yet still uncertain. Helen hovered between disbelief and exhilaration, the weight of possibility wrapping around her. Could this lead to the professional acknowledgement she had craved, or would it come with the cost of deeper scrutiny? Her mind raced with the implications. The next step seemed to draw closer, a winding path that still demanded unwavering resolve. As she stood in the dim lighting of the venue's hallway, the email felt like both validation and a challenge. Would she accept this opportunity, or back away to shield her newfound strength? The dilemma stirred within her, a bold question ringed with clarity. What would embracing this new chapter mean for her identity? The spectators outside could sense it, as well. The tension of transformation hung palpably in the air. Helen stood at the precipice of her new reality, arms trembling slightly as the gravity of her circumstances settled in. The email from the influential figure was not just an invitation. It was a clarion call demanding engagement with her deepest aspirations. This moment marked the convergence of her passion and potential, an opportunity that would test the strength she had cultivated through vulnerability and connection. Reflecting on the workshop, she realized she had transcended fear, redefined her identity, and cultivated a deeper understanding of her worth. The applause, the conversations, and the authentic connections made in that room were tangible evidence of a seismic shift, not just in her professional trajectory, but in her personal narrative. Now, she faced a decision that would further cement her transformation. With renewed clarity, Helen crafted her response to the email. She articulated her enthusiasm for collaborating, emphasizing her vision to merge emotional storytelling with scientific insight. No longer would she allow doubt to dictate her path. She was equipped with the knowledge that her experiences had genuine value in the discourse surrounding health. Her once muted voice was now a beacon of empowerment, and she was ready to take the next leap. Weeks passed, and Helen diligently worked with her new collaborator, blending their missions to create impactful workshops and content that wove the richness of personal stories into evidence-based practices. Her initial trepidation faded as each session unfolded, affirming the wisdom of intertwining narratives with nutritional knowledge. Participants, once skeptical, began to engage meaningfully, their barriers dissolving under the warmth of connection. Helen's name began to circulate within health advocacy circles. Invitations to speak on panels and collaborate with fellow professionals poured in. With each opportunity, she demonstrated her newfound competence, advocating passionately for a holistic approach to nutrition and health. A well-respected health journal even invited her to contribute an article that would explore the intersection of culture, tradition, and scientific evidence through personal lenses. Her parents watched in awe as their daughter took center stage in her community, transforming from the anxious schoolteacher into a recognized advocate. For the first time in years, Helen could see the flicker of pride in their eyes, the fulfillment she had longed for glimmering brightly against the backdrop of her warm home. Finally, as an integral part of a community health initiative, Helen organized a local gathering themed Nourishing Connections. Among the attendees were families sharing recipes alongside health professionals, all engaging in conversations that yawned into a beautiful tapestry of shared histories and future aspirations. Witnessing her grandmother's legacy thrive within her work felt like a return to her roots, a complete circle of personal and professional growth. Helen had conquered her fears, transformed her doubts into momentum, and emerged as a resilient figure in her field. The journey was fraught with challenges, but each step had fortified her resolve and validated her unique contribution. She no longer stood at the edge. She had established her place at the table, instilling a renewed sense of purpose not only in herself, but in everyone she engaged. Now, with solid confidence and recognized competence, Helen reflected on the myriad of connections she forged through storytelling and nutrition. Within the vibrant community around her, she had truly accomplished what once seemed unreachable. This was the moment she realized her legacy would continue through the narratives she inspired, reinforcing the truth that health transcends mere statistics. It is found in the stories that weave us together. Looking forward, Helen felt ready to confront the next chapter, now firmly rooted in a position of strength. It was time to expand her influence, transforming the landscape of health advocacy, one story at a time. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now, and don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.